I'm Elle Embers, and this is Cosmic Curiosities. Welcome back to Cosmic Curiosities. I'm your host, Elle Embers, and today we are shifting gears to focus a little more on health and wellness. Today's topic is all about the mind and gut connection. Now, gut health is incredibly important to our overall health and well-being. But how much of our gut health is influenced by our mind? Well, joining me to shed some light is psychotherapist, gut directed hypnotist, and wellness coach, Jayne Corner. So, let's dive in. Hi, Jayne. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm really well, thanks, Elle. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited about our chat today. Yeah, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Good to hear.
Well, before we get into the mind and gut connection, I just wanted to play a little quick game to kind of loosen things up. Are you keen for
it? Absolutely. Fire away.
Amazing. So, what is your favorite food, favorite song, and favorite book?
Oh, okay. Favorite food. Favorite food would have to be pizza. A good wood-fired pizza, either pepperoni or something with goat cheese and pumpkin and spinach and pine nuts or something like that. Favorite song. Oh, I have such a wide and varied music collection. Let me come back to that one. And for books, the same. Honestly, I've just started a book club here and was reading the latest book that we had I think it was called The Sound of Snails Eating. And it was all about this lady who had some health conditions, and she basically had this snail brought into her, and it was her journey of watching the snail, and it was a fascinating book. So I'm going to go with that one because it was a very different type of book, a very different take. So I'll go with that one. I'll have to come back to you on the song. Sorry, Elle.
No, the book sounds interesting.
Yeah, and also her relationship with time. I think, as we go about our days, when we're busy, it's like we never have enough of it. And then when you are, whether it's health or there's another reason that you aren't able to go about your daily life, time kind of moves differently.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting book.
Well, thanks for sharing. So would you like to start off by introducing yourself and telling everyone a little bit about what it is that you do?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I'm a psychotherapist. So I specialize in gut directed hypnotherapy and CBT, which is cognitive behavioural therapy for IBS. I founded the Calm and Happy Gut probably about 4 years ago now. So I work with clients one-to-one inside of the Calm Gut program, which is a 6-session program combining hypnosis and CBT for IBS. So I see clients from all over the world, literally, which is great. I have a YouTube channel called the Calm and Happy Gut. So I have a whole heap of content, education, hypnosis audios that people can listen to. So that's another great resource. And I also have hypnosis audios as well that my clients can purchase. And so, yeah, that's basically what I do. Is I'm very into the hypnosis, CBT, that behavioral therapy and approach for IBS.
And do you mind telling us a bit about what sparked your interest in working with hypnotherapy and specifically around the gut, around IBS and those sort of issues?
So health and well-being, I suppose, has always been in my blood. It's kind of hard to separate that from who I am. I became a wellness coach, about 8 years ago. It seems like yesterday, probably 8 years ago, and just worked with clients on kind of general, whether it was weight loss or they wanted to have more energy or sleep and those sorts of things. But I realized that we often know what we should be doing, and we often know what we want to be doing, but we don't do it. There's blocks, whether that's, physical blocks, whether that's mindset blocks. And so that kind of got me looking deeper into why we do what we do or why we don't do what we think we need to be doing. And so that got me into hypnosis. So I completed a government accredited diploma in clinical hypnotherapy about 7 years ago. And then when I was working with hypnosis, I then discovered this whole other area, which was gut directed hypnotherapy. And I was like, oh, what's that? And so when you sort of really dig into the research and how gut-directed hypnotherapy can help manage IBS symptoms, everything just kind of aligned for me. So when I was 15, I had was diagnosed with IBS and really suffered with a lot of pain, a lot of issues for probably over about a decade into my early 20s. So that's what really kind of sparked my interest. And the more I read and the more I understood and started working with clients and seeing these amazing transformations, it just got me hooked. And I've been in that world ever since.
Amazing. I guess, a lot of the time you see coaches that specialize in certain areas because they've been through that themselves.
Yeah.
And it's so often that we are able to help ourselves and that turns into this passion, this drive to help others. And I love that.
Yeah, I agree. I think the other really exciting thing with Mind Gut Connection is how mainstream it's becoming, how open that conversation has become from even, 5 years ago, it was sort of in the realm of the new age and like, oh, what's that? Like, this is this alternative. And now it's like, no, there is a connection between the mind and the gut, and it's really important and critical for health. So that's also really exciting to see that conversation open up.
Yeah, absolutely. Because this is something that is quite a common issue for a lot of people out there. And, even thinking about people in your life that are, oh, I can't eat that, or, every time I eat that, I'm not great. And they often associate a lot of sensitivities and things like that to food. But that may not always be the case. Is that right?
Yeah. I always kind of say this, food is not the enemy unless you've had there is a diagnosed an allergy. So, whether it's, like a peanut allergy is probably the most obvious one where there is an immune response in the body. But a lot of the time with different foods, the sensitivity, and I'm sure we'll get into this, is to do with the nerves inside of the gut. And it comes back to the nervous system. And it comes back to the way that the mind and the gut are communicating. So I've worked with clients who have pages and pages of foods that come back that they're sensitive to, and they get told that you can never eat these things again. And then, they'll go through a program of hypnotherapy and they're back to eating. I had one of my clients who was, after a couple of sessions, back to eating fish and chips on the beach, and all her friends and family are like, can you eat that? Because they were so having issues with food. So it's not always the food. It's not always the food.
So I guess how can we harness the power of our minds to influence our gut health and our overall health? How does that work?
Yeah, great question. I think it really starts with understanding the impact that our mind can have on our body and on a nervous system. And I always come back to the nervous system with this because it's almost like the master controller in the body. And so the most simplest place to start is looking at the impact of stress on our health. And the impact of chronic long-term stress can have so many, harmful side effects, whether that's back pain and that pain sensitivity increasing for someone, whether that's sleep problems, whether that's eczema, for example, that's connected to the stress cycle, digestive system issues, heart issues, all of these things can come back to stress. And so that stress can come from lots of areas. It can come from external areas of our lives, whether it's, financial, relationships, health, work, whatever it might be. And some of those things are outside of our control. But a lot of that stress is also from our minds and the way that we think and the way that we believe. And so if we're thinking anxious and stressful thoughts, and the body's going to feel that. And I often say to my clients that psychological stress is just as harmful as physical stress. Your mind doesn't necessarily know whether it's being chased by a mountain lion or you're reacting to an inbox full of emails. So I think it comes at the beginning is understanding the impact that our mind, in terms of our thoughts and beliefs, actually have on the body, and that flow effect onto our health and how that shows up. Yeah, and I can talk more about that as well if you would like me to.
Yeah, definitely. Dive in.
Yeah. So really when we think about our thoughts and beliefs, especially what I call, those stressful thoughts and anxious thoughts. And this is where CBT starts to come in, which is the relationship between our thoughts, the emotions that we feel, and then the physical sensations that we experience. In the case of IBS, whether that's irregular bowel habits or pain or nausea, or whatever that sort of shows up. So when we understand that, and when we have those stressful thoughts, the body, effectively, you're triggering your fight or flight response. So the sympathetic part of your nervous system, the stress response kind of kicks into gear. And that sets off this chain, rather predictable chain reaction inside of the body. So your body essentially is being primed to stand and fight or take flight and run away. And so when that happens, our heart rates start to increase. Our breathing starts to change. So we breathe quicker and our breath becomes shallower. So when we're stressed, we can notice that our breathing is really shallow. Some people almost kind of breathe up into their shoulders, and we stop breathing down into our bellies. Our pupils dilate, because when the body's primed for fight or flight, we need to get more light in, we need to see better, so that there's those changes. And blood flow is also changed. So it moves away from the digestive system, because we don't need to be digesting food if we're being chased by something or we need to fight. That blood needs to go to the muscles in the body, the arms and the legs, to do those things. So there's changes that happen inside of the body that then create issues with our health. So that's really the impact of stress. And as I say, psychological stress is just as harmful, if you like, as physical stress. And so if there's a belief there around, and again, talking about IBS specifically, I'm never going to get better, I'm always going to be like this, what's wrong with me? All of those thoughts, that creates a lot of stress and anxiety, a lot of frustration. Sometimes that can create anger. All of those emotions can switch on the body's stress response and keep someone trapped in this vicious cycle of IBS symptoms and stress. The opposite of that is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest mode, when everything starts to come back into balance. And so that's really where I focus with clients, is like, how can we start to dial down that real overactive and heightened nervous system and start to move into a place where their digestive system and all the systems in the body can really start to come back into balance. So yeah, but it really starts with the mind, of understanding the impact of thoughts, beliefs, and what is that doing, the impact on your health, basically.
Yeah. So I guess, the common misconception is emotional regulation or nervous system regulation is really about solving anxiety problems or depression problems. But it actually has a lot more to do with your physical health than what a lot of people think.
Yeah. It's interesting. I have a video that I posted a little while ago on my YouTube channel, which explains about the vicious cycle of stress and IBS symptoms. And for someone who's been working in this space for a long time, I just take it as a given that, people understand the connection between stress and physical health. There's the emotional health, also physical health, especially things like digestive system. And it always surprises me, the comments that I get on that video, or people reaching out to me after that video, that they had no idea. They had no idea that work stress and putting the two and two together, if they've had a really bad week at work, it might be really stressful, or deadlines, or they might have got into some sort of conflict with work colleagues, and then their stomach starts to flare up. And it's like, wait, and putting that connection together, that's when the aha moments start to come. But I think, especially when you work in the health and wellness space, we think, oh, of course people know that. But actually, I don't realize that. And so having that awareness, not just how you feel emotionally, like you say, in that emotional regulation, but knowing that when you start to work on the mind, that you can improve your physical health quite significantly as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you tell us a little bit more about hypnotherapy and CBT and how this assists in the treatment of IBS and these types of issues?
Yeah. So it starts with, it's always kind of like to take a step back and start understanding what IBS is really all about. So IBS is something called a dysfunction of the gut-brain interaction. It used to be called a functional bowel disorder, but that got updated a few years ago. And what that means is that there's nothing physically or structurally wrong with the bowel. So if someone could, with IBS, to kind of have a good look inside, they would see everything looking quite normal, which explains why a lot of the time test results come back as normal. And there's a lot of confusion. How can this be normal if I'm experiencing all of these, uncomfortable and painful symptoms? And so what basically IBS or the underlying cause is the brain-gut connection, and how there is a fault or a miscommunication in how those two systems are talking to each other. And so when the gut and the brain aren't communicating as they should, we can really see two main issues develop. One is something called altered bowel motility, which is the speed at which food is moving through the gut. And so that shows up as things moving too slowly, get constipation, or it shows up as things moving far too quickly, where we see diarrhea, or there's a mixture of the two where someone alternates between those two. The other issue that shows up is what we call visceral hypersensitivity. And this is basically where the nerves in the gut have become hypersensitive. So they react to normal levels of gas or fullness with pain, with a lot of discomfort. So something that is normal for a lot of people is highly reactive in the guts of someone with IBS, which starts to explain some of that food sensitivity. It's not the food, it's the sensitivity happening inside of the bowel. So when we understand that IBS comes back to the nervous system and the brain-gut connection, then we can start to harness that very same connection and focusing on the brain or the mind to start to influence the gut in a more positive way. So both CBT and gut-directed hypnotherapy address this altered bowel motility, the speed at which food is moving down, or is also called the transit time as food passes down through the gut. And they can also positively influence the sensitivity of the gut and start to dial that down, which is really, really exciting. And there's an awful lot of research studies now on both of these techniques. So cognitive behavioral therapy, if we kind of start there, really looks, as I mentioned, the relationship between our thoughts, our feelings and emotions, and then how that leads on to physical sensations. So in the case of IBS, a lot of that time it's an IBS flare-up, but that also could be jaw tension, or your shoulders start to get really tight, or there's other kind of stress triggers in the body, but also the actions that we do or we don't do. So if someone's experiencing a flare-up, they're most likely going to say no to meeting up with friends. They might say no to, leaving their house and doing something that otherwise would give them joy. So it has a real impact on what we do. And so what CBT looks to do is educate. That's the number one thing, educate about what IBS is. We call it psychoeducation. So it's educating what IBS is to help end some of that confusion. It's about educating on the impact of stress, the role of stress on the body and how that is triggering symptoms, and also the stress response. So somebody goes from feeling really confused and frustrated about their IBS symptoms to going, okay, that's starting to make sense. I'm sort of understanding, rather than having someone tell them, there's nothing we can do, we don't know why this is happening, you're just going to have to live with it. They're starting to connect some dots. And so in addition to educating, it's about I teach my clients a lot of relaxation techniques. So how do we switch off that stress response? And how do we start to turn on the rest and digest response? And that can be as simple as different breathing exercises, or what we call progressive muscle relaxation, which is a certain way of relaxing the muscles in the body. Start releasing a lot of that tension and that stress. The other thing which I think really sets CBT apart is the fancy word is cognitive restructuring, but really what that means is looking at the thoughts and beliefs that you have and starting to put the pattern together between the anxiety or the stress or what emotion is coming up, and starting to create change in some of those. So people move away from, I'm never going to get better, I'm always going to have this, what's wrong with me, I'm not normal, all of these thoughts that I hear, to it's going to be okay, I am okay, my body is taking its time to heal, whatever feels like that next step with the thoughts. And that's what I work with clients on, because I'm okay, it's going to be okay, has a very different emotional resonance than what's wrong with me, I'm never going to get better. Very, very different. And so we look at that, and we also, what CBT is fantastic for is this hypervigilance that a lot of, and again, it's not just IBS that this is related to, but when you have pain, when you have discomfort, you become really focused on that. Often it's the very first thing that you think about in the morning. And the more that we focus on something, the more we are aware of it. And I kind of call it the spotlight of attention. And it's a good analogy or example is like a mosquito bite. If you've ever been bitten by a mosquito, and mosquitoes absolutely love me, which is very annoying, but anyway. And when you get bitten, that's all you can focus on. And the more you focus on that mosquito bite, the itchier it gets. And so you scratch it, and then you focus more, and it becomes more and more, it's that kind of this itch scratch cycle. But if you can move your attention away from that, which I've, learned to do, train myself to do, I might think, oh, that's right. I remember I had a mosquito bite yesterday. So cognitive behavioral therapy can really help people start to lessen their focus and move their focus elsewhere. So their stomach doesn't become the first thing that they think about in the morning. They start to think about other things, and that in turn starts to set their day up in a more positive way. And then it's like the flow on effect from there. So that's really kind of CBT. And it looks at things like the avoidance behavior. So things that they're avoiding because of their symptoms, and also the safety behaviors. So the things they do or don't do, because while it decreases anxiety in the short term, it actually increases anxiety over the long term and really sort of steals, I call it stealing the joy from their lives. So we look at all of that. It's an incredibly powerful therapy and works extremely well for IBS. So that's that. I combine CBT with hypnosis. So gut directed hypnotherapy has been around since the 80s. People don't realize this. They're like, oh, is that new? I'm like, no. It's got almost 40 years of research behind it. It's, another fantastic, very well validated management approach for IBS. Many different research studies. It's also recommended by the American Gastroenterological Association as a treatment for those people with moderate to severe with IBS. So people who have had no relief with traditional forms such as dietary approach like low FODMAP or medication, then they go, okay, the next step is gut directed hypnotherapy. So it's well up there in terms of management. It's been shown to improve all aspects of IBS, so from reducing bloating and abdominal pain to dealing with that bowel dysfunction. So regardless of whether your bowel is working too fast or too slow, it helps to normalize that speed. And I think the main thing is as well, improving someone's quality of life. I've worked with clients who are pretty much housebound. Like they won't go anywhere because there's so much fear and anxiety around what will happen, all these what if thoughts. So that's what gut directed hypnotherapy can really do. And as I say, improving transit time, normalizing, reducing pain sensitivity, reducing the impact that stress can have on the nervous system and the digestive system. And it can create some incredible transformations, really quite incredible. So I feel like I'm just kind of touching the surface. I don't know if there's sort of questions around what is hypnosis and all of that, but really as an overall, that's what gut directed hypnotherapy is, using hypnosis with gut suggestions, basically.
Amazing. Always interests me so much when you think about how these things all interlock. They all work together. So with hypnotherapy, do you want to feel free to explain more on that? Because being a past life regressionist, we use hypnotherapy in that, but people have a very standard set idea on what hypnotherapy is, and so often they're wrong.
Yes.
So would you like to share more on that?
Yeah. The best way that I love to describe hypnosis is a strategic use of your imagination. So hypnosis, I always kind of say, is kind of defined by two things. One, it's an inward focused state of attention. So your attention kind of focuses inwards, often on one thing, which is the suggestion being given by the hypnotherapist. And so it's not sort of all around in the room what someone's talking about. You're focused inwards. The other, I guess, factor that defines hypnosis is a heightened state of suggestibility. And some are like, oh, what does that mean? And a suggestion or suggestibility is really an invitation to experience and to think about things in a different way. And so that's the way that I use things from a clinical perspective. So a really good example would be when I suggest to somebody that they imagine their bowel as a smooth, easy flowing river. That is a suggestion that they bring to life using their imagination in their mind, which then comes into this strategic use of the imagination. And that's really what hypnosis is. It's this, state of our minds where we can, if you like, access part of our minds that we can't usually access more consciously because, our mind is starting here, there, everywhere. And when we're in that state of hypnosis, we have access to, our subconscious mind, our inner wisdom. And the fascinating thing is, especially about medical hypnosis and gut directed hypnotherapy, science doesn't know how it works. They don't know how it works. There's been so many experiments, they've hooked people up to machines, and we can see the impact that it has on the brain. We can measure the impact when somebody is given a suggestion to slow down their blood pressure, to slow down the transit time of the food moving down through their gut. It works. There are research papers that show that it works. How does it work? We don't know. And I find that so interesting, that there's this incredible power that we can tap into in our minds to create real physical change. We can see it, it's researched, it's proven, it's there, but we don't know how. It's like it kind of brings that mystery of life and, you know, the mystery of the human body and what it's truly capable of. So it's fascinating. It's fascinating. But that's really what hypnosis is inward focused attention and strategic use of the imagination. It's nothing, you know, woo-woo, as you would know. We don't make clients cluck like chickens or mind control. It's none of that. It's none of that. And all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. So as a hypnotherapist, I like to, I'm your guide and you are the dreamer, so to speak. It's, you know, guided daydreaming was a term that I learned very early on in my hypnotherapist career. And that's what it is. We are the guides. You take those suggestions, you take our words, and you're the one that brings them to life in a way that, you know, works for you in that really powerful way.
Yeah, I have a colleague that refers to the hypnosis that we use as a interactive guided meditation.
Oh,
and
love that. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
So how often are our stomach issues related back to our stress levels and emotions? Is this something that is quite up there? This is one of the main reasons, or are there other factors at play?
In the work that I do, in the clients that I see, and from my own experience, I would say it's definitely up there. And that comes back to understanding the impact that stress has on the digestive system. So IBS or no IBS, there is a connection with the way that stress impacts the gut. And so, you know, it might be, or when we think about that brain gut connection, you know, an example is, you know, someone asks you to do a presentation at work and you might be feeling fine. And then the day before or the morning, like, oh my God, I have to present. Oh, you know, your stomach starts to kind of swirl. Maybe you run to the bathroom, you know, you start to feel a bit like, oh. Or, you know, when you're going on a first date, when you're sat there and your stomach starts to get all swirly and maybe you start to feel that, you know, uncomfortable sensations. Everybody can, I think, if you can relate to that, like, oh, that's right. That is an example of the you know, the mind-gut connection in action. Now, for people who don't struggle with IBS, often that discomfort or that sense of urgency or that upset stomach can subside, you know, within an hour or two. And then they don't think about it. But for people with IBS, with that underlying sensitivity, that flare-up can last the rest of the day, can last a couple of days, can last a couple of weeks. And so when somebody is stuck in this vicious cycle, so it's chicken or egg, what came first, the gut symptoms or the stress or the emotion? For some people, it's impossible to say. And I always kind of say it doesn't matter. When you're in that cycle, when you experience gut symptoms and you start to get stressed and you start to worry about your health, that can trigger more gut symptoms, which then makes you feel even more worried and more stressed and more anxious. And then your stomach gets worse. And then you get more sensitive. And then you are able to eat less and less foods because of the sensitivity. So you worry more and you get more stressed and you get more anxious. And clients can get locked into this for decades. I've worked with clients who have had IBS symptoms for 20, 30 years. So the impact there is quite significant. On the other side, you know, things like early childhood trauma, not always, that would be my caveat. There's not always trauma there with people who have IBS, but for some clients there is. And so that emotional trauma in younger people, especially as children, can influence how that the brain gut connection actually kind of forms and how it works. And there's dysregulation there that can happen. But even, you know, trauma where no one's had any gut symptoms, and then they might go through a divorce, or, you know, there might be a financial crisis, or whatever it means, that can sometimes trigger the onset of bowel problems, of IBS problems. And as I say, the difference is that when you get hooked into that cycle of stress and worry, that's often when it can just moves from acute to more of a long-term issue. So everybody is different, but I think to some extent we can all kind of think, oh yeah, when I felt nervous or stressed or anxious, I can feel that in my stomach. So there's absolutely a connection, and it's pretty significant with the clients that I see.
And is this sort of maybe not childhood trauma, but adulthood trauma any sort of issue that they go through, does this also include the realm of sensitivities or intolerances? So if someone becomes lactose intolerant or gluten intolerant, things like that, does that kind of fall into the same realm?
It's a really interesting question. And part of this, it kind of goes, always my caveat, kind of goes beyond scope for me to talk more about gluten and sort of lactose sensitivities and those sorts of things. But what I would say from my own experience and just from working with clients that I've seen is that for some of these things, there's almost like a tolerance level. So up to a certain point, someone can tolerate a certain amount, whether it's fructose or lactose or gluten or whatever it might be. And a lot of these foods can be sensitive anyway to the gut. They're kind of up there when it comes to IBS. These are the things, to cut out, et cetera, et cetera. So when you start to calm the nervous system down, reduce this hyperactivity of the nerves, I have seen time and time again, clients being able to go back to eating. For example, I love pizza. I don't always order the gluten-free pizza, and I can eat that and tolerate it with no problems. Many years ago, I couldn't do that. And I see that the same with my clients, when they have these food sensitivity tests, whether that's, I had one client I worked with like 4 A4 pages of all the foods that they couldn't eat. I mean, that in itself, I remember asking them, how does that make you feel? And they were like, stressed, anxious, worried, all these things. How is that helping,
Yeah.
So often I sort of say to clients, sometimes it might take a couple of sessions when we work together for things to calm down. Sometimes it might take a little longer, but then they can find that when they start to get curious and they reintroduce these foods, that they can tolerate them with no problem. And then they kind of find their kind of level. And that's where they stay. And as I say, for some clients, they're off eating, they're out in the restaurant ordering off the I don't want to use the word normal, but the gluten menu, so to speak, normal inverted commas. And again, no issues. So it's really interesting. I don't have a definitive answer on that, but I do wonder how much stress plays a role in sensitivities in people who haven't been diagnosed with IBS. It's a curious question to think about. Yeah, I would certainly say it would have an impact. How much, I'm not sure.
It's really interesting you bring up a tolerance level, because I myself am gluten intolerant, and I know that there are some, it's not potentially like some foods that I can eat, but there's a certain amount of gluten that I can ingest and be fine. And then there's a point where it's like, oh, I've had too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I understand that there is a point there where it's like, okay, I can handle up to this amount, but that amount can fluctuate depending on what my body is going through, what my emotional state is. And I've never kind of really thought about the link between the two. It's always been, I'll eat it and see what happens.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's really interesting. So when it comes down to things like hypnotherapy and CBT, are there certain things that work for everybody, or are there certain things that, everybody's different, they react more to CBT therapy than what they do with hypnotherapy, or are there umbrellas that they fit under?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So when I first started, I was really focusing on, I don't want to use just, because just sounds, like just hypnosis, and hypnotherapy is really powerful. But I was really focused on hypnotherapy. And then I started to, there were some clients that I would be seeing where there was like an extra layer. There was an extra piece of the puzzle that I just found was missing through, the various trainings and protocols that I had studied. And I'm like, something's missing here. So that got me into, that's probably coming up to just over 2 years ago, did a second diploma in cognitive behavioural hypnotherapy. Incredible course. And that was really merging CBT and hypnotherapy together. And that, taking everything that I learned and then really applying it to work with IBS clients, for me, I feel was a real game changer with the results that I got for clients, because I wasn't really focusing on helping clients to understand that relationship between, their thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and their physical symptoms. It was really kind of focusing on their symptoms, obviously working with them to reduce stress, that sort of thing. And for, I would say, majority of my clients, between the first and the second session, I get clients to do a thought catching exercise. And I get them to get really, really curious and to become really aware of what are the thoughts. So what's the situation? What's the thoughts? How are they feeling? And what do they notice? What do they notice about what happens? What do they do? And for many IBS clients, they suddenly have these aha moments of, wow, the first thought I have when as soon as I open my eyes is my stomach. That's where my attention goes, onto the stomach. And that thought might be, am I going to have a bowel movement today? Am I going to be late for work? And all of those thoughts. And that, if that's your first thought of the day, well, what does that do? It instantly puts you into this state of stress and anxiety. So being able to incorporate CBT, working with hypnosis is part of that session. I always include hypnosis in my sessions. But being able to help a client uncover their own pattern. And for some client, that pattern is stronger than others, but start to get the aha moments and then start to teach them strategies to unhook from that pattern, unhook from those thoughts and create a new pattern, a new program is incredibly powerful. And really that's when I started to see, clients after just 2-3 sessions, not for everybody, everyone is obviously different. Some clients it takes a little longer, but start to have these incredible transformations. We talked about food, and my sort of philosophy on food is, food is not necessarily the enemy. And there's 3 parts of eating when it comes to someone who has anxiety around food. There's the thoughts and feelings you have before that can start even just thinking about going to the restaurant at night or looking at the menu. There's the thoughts and the emotions that you have while eating that food. Am I going to pay for this? Is this going to be okay? Oh, I shouldn't be eating this. All of those thoughts. And then there's the thoughts and the emotions that we have afterwards. So even when we've eaten the food, like, oh no, why did I do that? Oh, I'm going to pay for this. I can't go anywhere. I have to be near the bus. All of these things. And so CBT for me allows me to work with my clients on that and very successfully help clients with food anxiety. So they're no longer afraid to eat or to try or get curious about those foods on that, those big long lists of you can never eat these foods ever again. It gives them the confidence and the trust in their body to start to reintroduce different foods, which often they haven't eaten for decades. So it was a missing piece. It really was that missing piece for me and the work that I do.
Yeah. And I know that people with IBS suffer with a lot of different varying symptoms, but when it comes down to stomach cramping, bloatedness, weight gain, weight loss, things like that, they all kind of fall into this umbrella, don't they, where they are symptoms of IBS but may not have been clinically diagnosed.
So I run practitioner training, and when we come on to, there's like a slide and I say, okay, how is IBS diagnosed? For example, like there might be nutritionists who are in sort of attendees, and they always kind of have a bit of a laugh, which we do, because a diagnosis of IBS is a diagnosis of exclusion. At this point, there isn't a test, and it literally feels like pulling your hair out if you're on the other side of that. What's wrong with me? Like, why is my stomach doing this? And so very often with a diagnosis, somebody has got the symptoms that, you've mentioned there. And so the first step should be, not always, the first step should be is to start ruling out more serious things. So that's things like IBD, that's things like bowel cancer, that's things such as, whether there's ulcers, whatever is happening, blood tests, stool tests, sometimes, scans and different scopes. And then once those things are ruled out, then it's called the Rome 4 criteria, and it's like a diagnosis based on someone's symptoms. And then once someone sort of meets that criteria, then not always, but often, they're like, oh, you have IBS, off you go. We don't know what to do with you. That I hear that so many times. It makes me, quite, I don't know what the word is, but it fuels my fire to do what I'm doing. But things such as weight loss in particular isn't necessarily a sign of IBS. It can indicate something else going on, unless there is pain and a lot of discomfort in eating, in which case somebody intentionally chooses not to eat or reduce the amount of food. And then I have clients again who really struggle. So it's not only the IBS symptoms that they're worried about, they become worried about what's happening to their body. Are they having enough nutrients? The amount of weight loss that they're experiencing is extreme. I had one client referred to me a year before last who literally could eat 5 things. And the nutritionist that she was working with was like, I literally don't know what to do with this particular client. Like, I'm out, I'm tapping out. I don't know what to do. Every time that she comes to see me, we have to take something else off the list. And this girl was desperate. And so I worked with her over 4 sessions, and she was a client that was, 2-3 sessions in, she's out having fish and chips down at the beach, and everyone's like, so it's really quite incredible. But yeah, getting a diagnosis and actually getting answers can be a very frustrating journey for a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. Well, do you have any more tips or tricks that you'd like to share with our listeners about the mind-gut connection, how they work together, how to enhance this process?
There's so much to unpack with that. I think the first thing is to be aware. Be aware of your breath, and be aware of, are you, that shallow chest breathing? And if you recognize that in yourself, and when you feel stressed and anxious, start to bring the breath down into the belly. So, belly breathing, diaphragmatic breathing is a very simple tool, but very effective, because essentially when you start to breathe deeper, you're sending a very strong message to your body, to your nervous system, that you are safe, that there is no saber-toothed tiger running after you. So number one, be aware of your breath. And if you notice that you are somebody who shallow breathes, start to drop into that deeper breath. Breathing exercises can be as complicated or as simple as you want them to be. I always say to my clients who come to me, they're incredibly stressed, I don't want you to count. I don't want you to think in through my mouth, out through my nose or mouth. It doesn't matter. I want you just to focus on deepening that breath. Step one. We can add everything in later. We want to keep things simple. The other thing is to be aware of your thoughts. Be aware of your thoughts, how that is making you feel, the emotion, or even when you're feeling anxious, ask yourself, what am I thinking? What am I believing about this that's creating this stress in my body? Because we can't change what we're not aware of. And I've got a few videos actually walking you through how to do this on my YouTube channel. So there's one called Wait, What? My Thoughts are Triggering My IBS. So there's some great resources. If this is new to you, you're like, I've never heard of this approach, then there's some fantastic resources to listen to. But start with getting aware. Start with being more mindful and present in your body about what's happening.
Yeah, definitely. We'll pop a link to your YouTube channel in the show notes as well, so everyone can easily access those resources. But thank you so much, Jayne. I really appreciate it. And if anyone is wanting to reach out to you and work with you, how can they do that? Where can they find you?
So the calmandhappygut.com is my website. I see clients from literally all over the world. So my consultations are via Zoom, which makes things nice and easy. I do offer a free 30-minute initial consult to just discuss with you your health history, IBS symptoms, discuss my approach, just to make sure it's the right fit for you. So if anyone is interested in working with me inside of the Calm Gut program, then there's a link on my website to book. And then we can just really have a chat to make sure that it's going to be the right approach for you. So that would be probably the best place that people can reach me.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Jayne. I really appreciate you sharing all your wisdom with us today, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Elle.
Well, this is your Earthside Spirit Guide signing off for the week. If you'd like to know more about how you can work with me, you can follow me on Instagram @l.embers or visit my website lembers.com.